The Karen sisters thought they owned the neighborhood until they made the mistake of targeting Marcus's Scarecrow. What started as petty mockery escalated into something far more sinister when they discovered the truth about what stood guard in his garden. By the time their $250,000 Lamborghini lay crushed beneath splintered wood and twisted metal, they realized they'd awakened something that had been waiting decades for revenge. Some protectors never rest, and some debts can only be paid in. Marcus Chen had built the Scarecrow 3 weeks after his grandmother's funeral, working through the night with trembling hands and tears that wouldn't stop falling. The October wind whipped through his backyard as he hammered the final nail into the crossbeam, the sound echoing off the Victorian houses that lined Maple Street like silent witnesses to his grief. She would have loved this, he whispered to the automare, stepping back to admire his creation. The Scarecrow stood 8 feet tall, dressed in his grandfather's old work clothes, a faded flannel shirt and patched denim overalls that still smelled faintly of pipe tobacco and garden soil. Marcus had stuffed the figure with hay from the same barn where his grandmother had taught him to tend her prized tomatoes 50 years ago. But it was the face that made the Scarecrow truly special. Instead of the traditional burlap sack, Marcus had carefully carved features from apple wood, painting them with the same loving attention his grandmother had given to her watercolors. The eyes were deep-set and knowing, the mouth curved in a slight smile that seemed to hold secrets. Around the Scarecrow's neck, he'd placed his grandmother's silver locket, the one she'd worn every day until cancer finally claimed her. "Watch over the garden, old friend," Marcus murmured, pressing his weathered palm against the Scarecrow's wooden chest. Just like she did. The next morning brought the first encounter with the Karen sisters. Diane and Beverly Ashford lived in the sprawling McMansion that had replaced the old Murphy cottage 2 years ago. They'd moved to Maple Street from the city, bringing with them a sense of entitlement that clung to them like expensive perfume. At 42 and 44 respectively, they'd never worked a day in their lives, sustained by trust funds and strategic marriages to men who valued trophy wives over genuine companionship. Marcus was watering his tomato plants when he heard the click of designer heels on pavement. He looked up to see the sisters approaching his fence, their faces pinched with disapproval. Diane wore a white tennis outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, while Beverly sported a pink tracksuit that screamed, "I shop to fill the void in my soul." "Excuse me," Diane called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "We need to discuss that thing in your yard." Marcus straightened slowly, his joints protesting after an hour of gardening. At 73, he'd learned to choose his battles carefully. "Good morning, ladies. What can I do for you?" "That ridiculous Scarecrow," Beverly chimed in, pointing a manicured finger at the figure standing guard among the tomatoes. "It's absolutely hideous. Do you have any idea how it affects our property values?" "Property values?" Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "It's a Scarecrow. It keeps the birds away from my vegetables." "It's an eyesore," Diane snapped. "This is a respectable neighborhood, not some backwoods farm. We've already spoken to the Homeowners Association about having it removed." The mention of the HOA sent a chill down Marcus's spine. The Ashford sisters had somehow maneuvered their way onto the board within months of moving in, using their wealth and connections to reshape the neighborhood according to their vision of suburban perfection. They'd already forced 3 families to repaint their houses, banned children from playing in the streets, and eliminated the annual block party that had been a tradition for over 30 years. "There's nothing in the covenants about scarecrows," Marcus said carefully. "I checked." "Oh, but there's plenty about maintaining neighborhood aesthetics," Beverly replied with a smile that never reached her eyes. "We are prepared to file a complaint. Unless, of course, you'd prefer to remove it voluntarily." Marcus looked back at his Scarecrow, standing tall and proud among his grandmother's heirloom tomatoes. The wooden face seemed to watch the sisters with quiet disapproval, as if it understood the threat they represented. "I'll think about it," he said finally. "You do that," Diane said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "We'd hate for this to become unpleasant." As the sisters walked away, their heels clicking a staccato rhythm on the sidewalk, Marcus felt something stir in the October air. The Scarecrow's flannel shirt rustled in a breeze that touched nothing else in the garden, and for just a moment, he could have sworn he heard his grandmother's voice whispering on the wind, "Some things are worth fighting for, Marcus. Some things are worth protecting." That afternoon, Marcus sat in his kitchen, staring at the Scarecrow through his window while he nursed a cup of cold coffee. The figure stood motionless among the tomato plants, but there was something about its posture that seemed more alert than before, as if it were listening to conversations carried on the wind. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus opened it to find his neighbor, Elena Rodriguez, holding a casserole dish and wearing a worried expression. "I saw the Ashford sisters talking to you this morning," she said, stepping inside without invitation, a privilege earned through 20 years of friendship. "They've been making rounds. They told Mrs. Patterson that her garden gnomes have to go, and they are demanding that the Johnsons remove their basketball hoop." Marcus accepted the casserole gratefully, inhaling the aroma of Elena's famous enchiladas. "They want me to get rid of the Scarecrow." "Of course they do." Elena's dark eyes flashed with anger. "Those women have been nothing but trouble since they moved in. They act like they own the whole neighborhood." "Maybe they do," Marcus said quietly. "They've got money, influence, and they are not afraid to use either." Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice even though they were alone. "Marcus, there's something else. My grandson Tommy, he says, has been seeing things. Strange things happening around your Scarecrow at night." "What kind of things?" "Lights. Movement. He swears he saw it walking around your garden after midnight." Elena shook her head. "I know how it sounds, but Tommy's a good kid. He doesn't make up stories." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the October weather. "I'm sure it's just his imagination." "Maybe," Elena said, but her tone suggested she wasn't convinced. "Just to be careful, okay? There's something different about this neighborhood lately. Something that wasn't here before those sisters arrived." After Elena left, Marcus stood in his kitchen, watching the Scarecrow through the window as shadows lengthened across his yard. The figure stood perfectly still, but there was something in its posture that seemed almost protective. The wooden face, carved with such care, appeared to be watching the Ashford house with patient intensity. As darkness fell, Marcus made his decision. He would not remove the Scarecrow. It was more than just a garden ornament, it was a connection to his grandmother, a guardian of her memory, and a symbol of everything the Ashford sisters were trying to destroy. If they wanted a fight, he would give them one. But as he prepared for bed that night, Marcus had no idea that his Scarecrow had its own plans for dealing with the Karen sisters. Plans that had been germinating in the darkness since the moment they'd first spoken their threats. In the garden, the Scarecrow stood sentinel in the moonlight, its wooden eyes reflecting the stars like ancient coals. The silver locket around its neck caught the light, and for just a moment, it seemed to pulse with a heartbeat all its own. The autumn wind whispered through the tomato plants, carrying with it the scent of old earth and older promises. Some guardians never rest. Some protectors never forget. And some debts can only be paid in full. The Scarecrow waited, patient as the grave, for the Karen sisters to make their next move. It wouldn't have to wait long. The next morning brought the first sign that something had changed in the night. Marcus discovered it when he went to water his tomatoes at dawn, a ritual he'd maintained for 40 years. The Scarecrow stood in its usual place, but something was different. The wooden head had turned, not dramatically, but enough that it now faced the Ashford house directly. The carved eyes seemed to hold a malevolent gleam in the early morning light, and the slight smile appeared more sinister than welcoming. "That's impossible," Marcus muttered, circling the figure slowly. He'd built the Scarecrow himself, he knew exactly how it had been positioned. The head had been facing east toward the rising sun, not northwest toward the McMansion. But the crossbeam showed no signs of loosening, and the hay stuffing remained perfectly intact. As he stood there trying to rationalize what he was seeing, a blood-curdling scream shattered the morning quiet. The sound came from the direction of the Ashford house, followed by the crash of breaking glass and Beverly's voice shrieking, "Get it away! Get it away from me!" Marcus dropped his watering can and hurried toward the fence that separated their properties. Through the manicured hedges, he could see Beverly Ashford standing in her pristine kitchen, pressing herself against the refrigerator while pointing at something on the floor. Diane rushed in wearing a silk robe, her face pale with alarm. "What happened?" Diane demanded. There was a bird, Beverly gasped, her voice trembling. A huge black bird. It flew right through the window and it was just staring at me. Its eyes were like it knew me. Marcus could see the shattered remains of what had probably been an expensive vase scattered across the white marble floor. But there was no bird in sight. Birds don't just fly through windows, Diane said, but her voice lacked conviction. This one did. And it left this. Beverly held up a single black feather, easily 8 inches long and gleaming with an oily iridescence. Neither sister seemed to notice the thin red line that ran down its length, like dried blood. Marcus backed away from the fence, his heart hammering. He'd been around birds his entire life, helping his grandmother tend her garden, and he'd never seen a feather like that. It was too large, too dark, and there was something about its shape that seemed wrong, as if it had come from something that was only pretending to be a bird. Probably just a crow, he called out, trying to sound casual. They can be aggressive. This time of year. Both sisters turned to glare at him through the hedge. This is your fault, Diane snapped. That ridiculous scarecrow of yours is attracting vermin. Scarecrows are supposed to keep birds away, Marcus replied, but even as he said it, he felt a chill. The scarecrow's wooden face seemed to be watching the exchange with quiet satisfaction. The sisters spent the rest of the morning filing complaints with animal control, the HOA, and anyone else who would listen. But Marcus noticed they stayed well away from the fence line, casting nervous glances toward his yard whenever they thought he wasn't looking. That afternoon, Elena Rodriguez appeared at his door again, this time without a casserole. Her face was tight with worry. Marcus, we need to talk. Something's happening to the neighborhood. She followed him into the kitchen, where they could see the scarecrow standing guard over the tomato plants. Mrs. Patterson called me this morning. She said her cats have been acting strange, yowling all night, refusing to go outside. And the Johnson's dog won't stop barking at your yard. Marcus poured 2 glasses of iced tea, his hands steadier than he felt. Animals can sense changes in weather. Maybe there's a storm coming. This isn't about weather. Elena's voice was firm. My grandson Tommy snuck out last night to see what was happening. He watched your scarecrow for 3 hours, Marcus. 3 hours. And he says it moved. Not just turning its head, actually moved. Walking around your garden, tending to the plants like it was alive. Marcus felt the bottom drop out of his stomach. Tommy has a vivid imagination, he has a cell phone, Elena interrupted. He took video. She pulled out her phone and showed him a short clip. The video was grainy and shaky, clearly filmed through a fence at night, but Marcus could make out the unmistakable silhouette of his scarecrow moving between the tomato plants with slow, deliberate steps. The figure paused at one point, turning its wooden head toward the camera, and the carved eyes seemed to glow with pale light. That's impossible, Marcus whispered, but the words felt hollow. Is it? Elena leaned forward. Marcus, tell me about your grandmother's garden. Really tell me. There was something special about it, wasn't there? Something she never talked about. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering. She always said the earth here was different. That it remembered things. She had these rituals, little things she'd do when she planted, when she harvested. She'd whisper to the plants, leave offerings for what she called the old spirits. What kind of offerings? Food. Milk. Sometimes. Marcus hesitated. Sometimes her own blood. Just a drop or two from a pricked finger, mixed into the soil. Elena's face paled. Marcus, where did you get the wood for the scarecrow's head? From the old apple tree in her backyard. The one that was struck by lightning the night she died. The memory came flooding back, how he'd found the perfect piece of wood among the fallen branches, how it had felt warm to the touch despite the cold night air. Why? Because I think your grandmother left more than just a garden behind. I think she left a guardian. Before Marcus could respond, they heard the sound of an engine revving, followed by the screech of tires on pavement. Through the window, they watched as Beverly Ashford's silver BMW careened down Maple Street, far too fast for the residential zone. "She's going to kill someone driving like that," Elena muttered. They watched the car disappear around the corner, then turned their attention back to the Scarecrow. It stood motionless in the afternoon sun, but Marcus could have sworn its wooden head had shifted slightly, as if it were watching the BMW's retreat with interest. 20 minutes later, they heard the sirens. The accident happened at the intersection of Maple and Oak, where Beverly had blown through a stop sign and sideswiped a delivery truck. No one was seriously injured, but Beverly's BMW was totaled and she was cited for reckless driving. But it was what the police found in her car that made Marcus's blood run cold. According to the report that circulated through the neighborhood gossip network, Beverly had been found in a state of near hysteria, claiming that something had been following her car. She kept pointing at the windshield, insisting that there were claw marks in the glass, but the police saw nothing. More disturbing were the black feathers they'd found scattered throughout the vehicle's interior, dozens of them, all impossibly large and gleaming with that same oily iridescence. The police had no explanation for how they'd gotten there, since all the windows had been closed and the air conditioning was running. That evening, as Marcus sat in his kitchen watching the Scarecrow through the window, he noticed something that made his heart skip a beat. The silver locket around the figure's neck was no longer just catching the light, it was glowing with a soft, pulsing radiance that seemed to match the rhythm of a heartbeat. His grandmother's heartbeat. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus opened it to find Diane Ashford standing on his porch, looking more disheveled than he'd ever seen her. Her perfect hair was mussed, her makeup smeared, and her hands shook as she clutched a manila envelope. "We need to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stepped aside to let her enter, noting how her eyes immediately went to the window overlooking his garden. She flinched when she saw the Scarecrow, as if the wooden figure had personally offended her. "I've been doing some research," Diane said, settling into his kitchen chair with obvious reluctance. "About this house. About the previous owners." She opened the envelope and pulled out a stack of photocopied documents, property records, newspaper clippings, and what appeared to be pages from old journals. "Your grandmother wasn't just a gardener," Diane continued. "She was something else. Something people in this neighborhood whispered about for decades." Marcus felt his defenses rising. "My grandmother was a wonderful woman, she was a witch." Diane interrupted. "A real one. These documents prove it. Look." She spread the papers across his kitchen table. The newspaper clippings dated back to the 1960s, with headlines like "Mysterious crop failures plague local farms" and "Neighbors report strange lights in Chen Garden." The journal pages were harder to read, written in faded ink, but Marcus could make out references to the old woman and her unholy garden. "According to these records," Diane said, "your grandmother was involved in some kind of occult practice. She was performing rituals, Marcus. In that garden where your Scarecrow now stands." Marcus studied the documents, his mind racing. Some of the details were accurate, the descriptions of his grandmother's nighttime gardening sessions, the unusual fertility of her soil, the way her plants seemed to grow faster and stronger than anyone else's. "Even if any of this is true," he said carefully, "what does it have to do with you?" Diane's composure cracked. "Because I think she cursed this place. And I think that thing in your yard is carrying out her will." "That's ridiculous, is it?" Diane's voice rose. "Beverly's accident wasn't random. That bird attacked WA. The emergency vehicles arrived within minutes, an ambulance for Beverly, who was found catatonic in her driveway, and a police cruiser for the noise complaints from neighbors who'd heard her screaming. By the time the flashing lights painted the street in alternating red and blue, the Scarecrow had returned to its original position, standing innocently among the tomato plants as if it had never moved at all. Marcus watched from his window as paramedics loaded Beverly onto a stretcher. Her eyes wide and unseen, her lips moving in what appeared to be a constant, soundless prayer. Diane rode with her in the ambulance, but not before shooting one last venomous look toward Marcus's garden. "This isn't over," she'd hissed as the paramedics wheeled her sister away. "I'll find a way to stop this." But as the ambulance disappeared into the night, Marcus wondered if it wasn't already too late for the Ashford sisters. The Scarecrow's message had been clear: some debts could only be paid in full. And from what he was beginning to understand about his grandmother's legacy, The debt the sisters had incurred by threatening her garden was steeper than they could possibly imagine. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Marcus was having his coffee when he heard the rumble of a diesel engine outside. Through his window, he watched a massive black pickup truck pull into the Ashford driveway. 3 men emerged from the vehicle, all wearing dark suits that looked expensive and slightly out of place in the suburban setting. The largest of the 3, a man with grained temples and hands that looked like they'd seen violence, approached Marcus's front door. His knock was firm but not threatening. "Mr. Chen. I'm Vincent Caruso. I work for the Ashford family." Marcus opened the door cautiously. "Work for them how?" "Private security. Mrs. Diane Ashford has asked me to assess the situation regarding your property." Vincent's eyes moved past Marcus to survey the garden. "She's mentioned some concerns about neighborhood safety." "It's just a scarecrow," Marcus said, but he could see that Vincent wasn't buying it. The man's gaze had found the wooden figure among the tomato plants, and his expression had shifted from professional skepticism to something resembling unease. "Mrs. Ashford has authorized me to make you an offer," Vincent continued. $100,000 for you to relocate. Cash. No questions asked. Marcus nearly choked on his coffee. $100,000. For what? For your cooperation in resolving this situation. Vincent's voice remained level, but Marcus could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Mrs. Ashford is prepared to cover all moving expenses, help you find a new home, whatever you need." "And if I refuse?" Vincent's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Let's hope it doesn't come to that." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus had dealt with bullies before, but never ones with this level of resources and apparent connections. He was about to respond when he noticed something that made his blood run cold. The scarecrow was moving. Not dramatically, just small adjustments in posture, a slight tilting of the wooden head, the way someone might shift their weight when listening to an interesting conversation. But Vincent's 2 companions had noticed it too. One of them, a younger man with nervous eyes, had actually taken a step backward. "I'll think about it," Marcus said finally. "You do that," Vincent replied, but his attention was now fully focused on the scarecrow. "We'll be in touch." As the 3 men walked back toward their truck, Marcus heard one of them whisper, "Did you see that thing move?" "Shut up, Vincent," hissed back. "Just get in the truck." But Marcus could see the fear in all 3 faces as they drove away. Whatever reputation the Ashford sisters had built for themselves, it was clear they'd finally encountered something that money and threats couldn't solve. That afternoon, Elena Rodriguez appeared at his door with her grandson Tommy in tow. The boy looked pale and shaken, his usual teenage bravado replaced by genuine fear. "Tell Mr. Chen what you saw last night," Elena urged. Tommy fidgeted with his phone, avoiding eye contact. "It was around 2 in the morning. I was watching through my bedroom window, you know. And I saw your scarecrow, it was digging." "Digging?" "Yeah, man. Like, with its hands. It was digging holes all around your garden, and then it was planting things." Marcus felt his mouth go dry. "What kind of things?" "I don't know. They looked like roots. But wrong somehow. Too dark, too twisted." Tommy finally looked up, his eyes wide with terror. And the scarecrow was talking to them. I couldn't hear what it was saying, but I could see its mouth moving, and the things it was planting, they were responding. Moving. Like they were alive. Elena placed a protective hand on her grandson's shoulder. "Tommy, show him the other video." The boy reluctantly pulled up another file on his phone. This one was even grainier than the first, shot through his bedroom window in the early morning darkness. But Marcus could clearly see the scarecrow's silhouette moving between the tomato plants, its wooden hands working something into the soil. More disturbing were the shapes that seemed to writhe beneath the earth wherever the scarecrow had been working. The ground appeared to pulse with unnatural life, as if something vast and hungry was stirring just below the surface. "There's more," Tommy whispered. After it finished planting, it looked right at the Ashford house. "And I swear I saw it. I saw it smile." Not the painted smile, but like its whole face changed for a second. Marcus studied the video, his mind racing. His grandmother had always said the earth here was different, that it remembered things. But what if it was more than just remembering? What if it was actively participating in whatever she'd set in motion all those years ago? Tommy, I need you to promise me something, Marcus said seriously. Don't go near my garden. Don't even look at it after dark. Can you do that? The boy nodded eagerly, clearly relieved to have an excuse to avoid the Scarecrow. After Elena and Tommy left, Marcus stood in his kitchen, staring out at his garden with new eyes. The tomato plants looked healthier than they had in weeks, their leaves a vibrant green despite the approaching winter. But there was something else, patterns in the soil that hadn't been there before, subtle ridges and depressions that seemed to form geometric shapes. As he watched, a movement caught his eye. Not the Scarecrow this time, but something else. The ground near the fence line seemed to ripple, like water disturbed by an unseen swimmer. And for just a moment, Marcus could have sworn he saw something dark and root-like break the surface before disappearing back into the earth. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. The caller ID showed the number for St. Mary's Hospital. Mr. Chen. This is Dr. Sarah Winters. I'm calling about Beverly Ashford. Marcus felt his heart skip. Is she all right? That's a complicated. Mrs. Ashford has been in a catatonic state since she was brought in. But there's something else. Something I've never encountered in 20 years of practice. What do you mean? Her sister mentioned that you live next door. That there was some kind of dispute. Mr. Chen, I need to ask you directly, is there anything unusual about your property? Anything that might explain what's happening to Mrs. Ashford? Marcus chose his words carefully. She's been under a lot of stress lately. Neighborhood politics, you know how it is. Mr. Chen, Beverly Ashford is covered in what appear to be root systems under her skin. They are not causing any physical harm, but they are growing, spreading, and they respond to certain stimuli. What kind of stimuli? Soil samples. We brought in some potting soil to test her reactions, and the root systems under her skin became extremely active. Almost violent. But here's the strange part, when we brought in soil from other locations, there was no reaction. It was only when we used soil from your neighborhood that she responded. Marcus felt the room spinning around him. Doctor, I don't understand, neither do I. But I think your neighbor has been exposed to something. Something that's changing her on a fundamental level. Dr. Winters paused. Mr. Chen, I need you to be honest with me. Is there anything about your property that might be causing this? Before Marcus could answer, the line went dead. Not just dead, filled with the sound of rustling leaves and whispered voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize but somehow understood. The voices were calling out coordinates, mapping the neighborhood, describing each house and its occupants in clinical detail. And then, clear as day, he heard his grandmother's voice among the whispers, the harvest is almost ready, Marcus. Soon, the debts will be paid. The phone went silent, leaving Marcus standing in his kitchen with his hands shaking. Outside, the Scarecrow stood motionless in the gathering dusk, but Marcus could see that the silver locket around its neck was now glowing so brightly it was visible even in the fading daylight. As he watched, the wooden head turned slowly toward the Ashford house, and Marcus realized with growing horror that his grandmother's guardian wasn't just protecting the garden anymore. It was expanding its territory. The ground beneath the Ashford house began to ripple, just like it had near his fence line. And somewhere in the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of sirens approaching, not for an accident this time, but for something far worse. The reckoning had begun, and the Karen sisters were about to learn that some guardians never forget, and some debts can only be paid with everything you have. In the hospital, Beverly Ashford opened. The emergency call came at 3:47 a.m. Marcus was jolted awake by the sound of his phone buzzing against his nightstand. The caller ID showed Elena Rodriguez, and her voice was thick with panic. Marcus, you need to get over here. Now. Something's happening to the Ashford house. He stumbled to his bedroom window and looked out at the McMansion across the street. What he saw made his blood freeze. The entire structure was sinking, not collapsing, but actually being pulled down into the earth as if the ground beneath it had turned to quicksand. The perfectly manicured lawn was rippling like water, and strange phosphorescent lights were pulsing beneath the surface. "Jesus," Marcus whispered. "It's been going on for an hour," Elena's voice crackled through the phone. "The fire department can't get close. Every time they try, their equipment sinks into the ground. And Marcus, there are sounds coming from underneath. Voices." Marcus threw on his clothes and rushed outside. Half the neighborhood had gathered in the street, keeping a safe distance from the Ashford property. The house had already sunk 3 feet into the earth, and the process was accelerating. Windows were cracking under the pressure, and the foundation was groaning like a living thing in pain. But it was the sounds Elena had mentioned that truly terrified him. Rising from the earth came the unmistakable voices of the Ashford sisters, not screaming, but speaking in unison, their words carrying clearly on the night air despite the chaos. "We understand now. We see what we've done. The earth remembers. The earth collects. The earth always wins." Fire Chief Rodriguez, Elena's brother, approached Marcus with a grim expression. "Chen, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Is there anything about your property that might be causing this?" Marcus looked back at his garden, where the Scarecrow stood silhouetted against the night sky. The wooden figure seemed larger somehow, more imposing, and the silver locket around its neck was now blazing like a star. As he watched, the Scarecrow's head turned toward the sinking house, and Marcus could have sworn he heard his grandmother's voice on the wind. "The harvest is ready." "I don't know," Marcus said, which was technically true. He didn't know, he was only beginning to understand. "Well, you better figure it out fast," Chief Rodriguez said. "Because whatever's happening over there, it's spreading." He was right. The rippling effect that had started beneath the Ashford house was now extending across the street, reaching toward other properties. Mrs. Patterson's garden gnomes were tilting as the ground beneath them shifted. The Johnsons' basketball hoop was slowly sinking into their driveway. And with each new area affected, more voices joined the chorus rising from the earth, the voices of everyone who had ever been driven from the neighborhood by the Ashford sisters' machinations. The young couple who'd been forced to sell because of an HOA lawsuit. The elderly man who'd lost his home to property value concerns. The single mother who'd been harassed until she moved away. They were all down there in the dark beneath the earth, and they were all speaking in unison. "The earth remembers. The earth collects. The earth always wins." As dawn approached, Marcus found himself standing in his garden, face to face with the Scarecrow. Up close, he could see that the wooden features were no longer static, they moved and shifted like living tissue, and the painted eyes now held depths that seemed to stretch into eternity. "Grandmother," he whispered. The Scarecrow's mouth moved, and when it spoke, the voice was unmistakably hers. "Hello, Marcus. I've been waiting for you. What's happening? What are you doing to the neighborhood?" "Not me, dear one. The earth itself. I simply prepared the ground." The Scarecrow's wooden hand gestured toward the chaos across the street. "For 40 years, I tended this soil. Fed it. Taught it to remember. And it remembers everything, every kindness, every cruelty, every debt that was never paid." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face. "But the people who are trapped down there, they didn't all deserve this. Didn't they?" The Scarecrow's head tilted, and for a moment, Marcus saw his grandmother's actual face superimposed over the wooden features. "The earth sorts the innocent from the guilty, Marcus. Those who were driven away by greed and hatred, they are being gathered home. Those who did the driving." The Scarecrow's smile was terrible. "They are learning what it means to be consumed by the very ground they tried to own." As if to emphasize the point, the Ashford house gave a final, groaning lurch and disappeared completely beneath the earth. The manicured lawn sealed itself over the spot where the McMansion had stood, leaving only a perfectly circular patch of impossibly green grass. But the voices continued to rise from below, and Marcus realized with growing horror that the Ashford sisters weren't dead, they were something else now, part of the earth itself, conscious and aware but trapped forever in the dark soil that had claimed them. "You have to stop this," Marcus pleaded. Please. Stop it. The Scarecrow laughed, and the sound was like wind through dry leaves. Oh, Marcus. This is just the beginning. The earth has been patient for so long, but now it's ready to reclaim what was stolen. Every subdivision built on farmland. Every mall constructed over wetlands. Every piece of concrete poured over living soil. The earth remembers all of it. Marcus looked around at the neighborhood, his neighborhood, and saw it with new eyes. The perfectly straight streets that had been carved through ancient forests. The identical houses that had replaced the farmland where his grandmother had first learned to speak to the earth. The sprinkler systems that had turned native grasslands into artificial lawns. This whole place is built on stolen ground, he whispered. Now you understand. The Scarecrow's wooden hand reached out and touched Marcus's cheek with surprising gentleness. But you, dear one, you have a choice. You can leave, find new ground to tend. Or you can stay and help me finish what I started. What do you mean? The earth needs gardeners, Marcus. People who understand that the land isn't something to be owned, but something to be partnered with. People who know how to listen to what the soil is saying. The Scarecrow's eyes blazed with inner fire. Join me, and I'll teach you the old ways. The true ways. Together, we can heal what's been broken. Marcus looked at the chaos around him, the emergency vehicles, the terrified neighbors, the ground that continued to ripple and shift as the earth reclaimed what had been taken from it. Part of him was horrified by what his grandmother had become, by the terrible justice she was dispensing. But another part of him, the part that had loved her gardens, that had learned to read the language of growing things, understood. The earth had been patient for so long, accepting the wounds inflicted by those who saw it only as a commodity to be exploited. But patience, even the patience of the earth itself, had limits. I need time to think, Marcus said. Time is exactly what you don't have. The Scarecrow pointed toward the horizon, where the first pale light of dawn was beginning to show. The harvest moon is setting, Marcus. When it's gone, the choice will be made for you. The earth will judge you along with everyone else. As if summoned by her words, Vincent Caruso and his two companions appeared at the edge of the garden. But these weren't the same men who had visited Marcus the day before. Their expensive suits were torn and dirt-stained, their faces pale with exhaustion and terror. And their eyes held the same unseen quality that Beverly Ashford's had possessed. Mr. Chen, Vincent said, his voice hollow and echoing. Our employers would like to speak with you. Your employers are dead, Marcus replied. No, Vincent smiled, and Marcus could see dirt spilling from between his teeth. They are very much alive. Just relocated. They want to discuss terms. The three men began walking toward Marcus, but their movements were wrong, too fluid. Too coordinated, like puppets being manipulated by the same invisible hand. As they approached, Marcus could see the telltale signs of root systems moving beneath their skin, and he realized that they too had been claimed by the earth. The offer still stands, Vincent continued. $100,000. Cash. All you have to do is walk away. And if you refuse? Vincent's smile widened and more dirt spilled from his mouth. Then you'll join us in the ground. The earth is very welcoming, Mr. Chen. Very embracing. Marcus looked at the Scarecrow, whose wooden features had hardened into an expression of grim determination. Choose quickly, Marcus. The moon is almost gone. He looked up at the sky, where the harvest moon hung like a pale coin against the growing dawn. It was beautiful and terrible, ancient and patient. And as he watched, he could feel the earth beneath his feet calling to him, offering him a choice that would determine not just his fate, but the fate of everyone who had ever tried to own what could never truly be possessed. The ground began to ripple beneath his feet, and Marcus realized that whatever decision he made, it would have to be now. The earth had waited long enough for its answer. In the distance, he could hear police sirens approaching and the sound of news helicopters circling overhead. The outside world was beginning to take notice of what was happening in the quiet suburban neighborhood. But Marcus understood that it was already too late for outside intervention. The earth had made its judgment, and the harvest had begun. Now all that remained was to decide whether he would be gardener or crop.